Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here at Tank12, how you wanna call me, I don't really care, and welcome back to World of Tanks. Today we're going to be taking a look at the T-34, yes, you know which tank I'm talking about. This is another one of the Holy Trinity, as I like to call them. T-34, Lowe, and KV-5, the Holy Trinity of premium tanks. I know the M6 Mutant, as I have right here, is the oldest premium tank in the game, probably. But since this was a pre-order, I'm not going to be taking this one into account just yet. We will have a review on this tank though. I think I may have done one, but I'm not entirely certain. Today it's all about the T-34. Now this was my second premium tank at tier 8. Probably my second premium tank ever. My first premium tank that I received was the Lowe. The Lowe, back then, it was a great deal for me, something along the lines of $20 that I paid before they really started upping the prices, and it had some serious problems. The Lowe back then, the loadout that I have on this tank is still exactly the same as the loadout I had on this one when I first got it. Now, if we check my service records and my vehicles, my games played, you can see that my most played games are in the Lowe and in the T-34. What does that mean? Well, I didn't have premium at that time, since I was a student and getting money into World of Tanks was a bit difficult. It's not as I have right now, as you can see, basically all premium tanks. But it was very difficult, and what you did back then was you bought one or two premium tanks and you played them until you couldn't play them anymore. You can see I have almost 3,000 games in my Lowe, and I have basically the 3 marks done in it, so I don't really care about the moving damage anymore or the average damage. And the same with my T-34. I finished that 3 mark a very long time ago. I think about 4 years now. On my Lowe it was also I think about 2 years or 3 years. So I never really played the T-34 anymore because I had other premium tanks to play. So obviously, getting back into the T-34 after some patches, some upgrades and all that stuff, this vehicle really has changed quite a bit. It still is the powerhouse with the turret and with the 120mm gun, which was very unique back in the days, because this tank used to be a tier 9 heavy tank. This used to be the standard tier 9 heavy for the American tech tree, which eventually led to the T-30. But we both know that the T-30 and the T-34 were taken out of the heavy tech tree. The T-30 became a tank destroyer at tier 9, and the T-34 became a tier 8 premium. And this is how I got the T-34. This tank was given to me by Wargaming because I had this vehicle first as a tier 9, and I unlocked it and I got the M103. The M103. That's very interesting because if we take a look at my M103 and we just go to tier 9 right here, let's check my M103, and you look at my stats on my M103. Where is it? M103. Okay, only available in my garage. We don't want to check for only availability on my garage or in my garage. There's my M103, and you can see I have 43% on this tank. That is a very, very bad stat for a tier 9 vehicle, while I have most of my tier 9s that I have played recently have over 50, over 60% win rate most of the time. The tier 9s that I haven't played in a very long time have a very bad win rate. So why is it 43% on my M103? It isn't that bad of a tank, right? It isn't that bad. Well, the thing is that this M103, all these stats belong to my T-34. That's when my T-34 was my tier 9, and it was a really bad tier 9 vehicle. So yeah, the funny thing is I still own this tank, and it's my second most played tank, and I haven't really played it in 4 years. And I've made a lot of money, a lot of credits playing this vehicle. And because of this, we're gonna be reviewing this tank right now. So firepower, it is a very unique kind of feat to have a 120mm gun It used to be very unique. It is not very unique anymore, to be fair. It has 248 millimeters of pen, 400 alpha damage, which was huge back then. And 248 millimeters of pen at tier 8 is still very, very respectable, especially if you also have APCR. You can see this is also a little bit of my time when premium shells were very expensive, and I only have like 4 premium shells loaded in there. And as you can see right there, I've decided to load some more premium. And it's quite fitting that this tank actually has exactly 34 shells. So the T-34 has exactly 34 shells in its turret. These shells must be huge. You can see that the rate of fire with this vehicle is only 4.64 rounds per minute. You can see that we're running the gun rammer, and we also have optics on this vehicle. Yeah, this was back then when you didn't want to have like, nobody spotting for you, so you had to give yourself a little bit of view range. So I decided to put coated optics on, but there are certainly other options that probably would be better for the T-34, such as the vertical stabilizer, for example, or improved hardening to get a little bit more HP and more resistance with your tank, but we're still running coated optics. And that's how I got my 3 marks, so yeah, somehow it still worked. The gun traverse is atrocious, just like the reload time. It's like gun loading time that's almost 13 seconds. For a tier 8, that's pretty long. Considering the caliber though, it does make a lot of sense that it's a long reload. You have a gun traverse of 18.77 degrees per second. That is not very fast. The turret is very, very slow. It's basically infamous for slow turning radius with the turret, but it was one of the first premium tanks with very good gun depression. Very, very good. 10 degrees of gun depression is incredible for ridgelines. So this is exactly how you were supposed to play this tank. Haul down, use the massive turret, use the gun, stay on the ridgeline. You would be able to do some serious damage with this tank. Now, the Lowe back then didn't have the 10 degrees of gun depression that it has right now. I think the Lowe, if we compare it real fast, the Lowe has some pretty impressive 10 degrees as well. Even better gun elevation angles with 38. But the T-34 back then, that was rather unique. Now, the gun elevation with 15 degrees is rather bad. So if anyone is above you, you're going to have a problem with this tank. The aim time on this vehicle is 2.79 seconds. We actually have the enhanced gun laying drive in there, so your aim time speed has been increased or decreased a little bit, and the dispersion at 100 meters with 0.34 is actually quite decent, in my opinion. Just takes a while to get that bloom fully, loaded in. So 1854 DPM with this vehicle, that's nothing too amazing. That's rather bad. You do not do a lot of damage, especially if you compare it to the KB5 with 2.5k. That is 700 damage more per minute, and that can do quite a difference. But this tank has other strengths. Its strengths rely on its massive turret. This massive turret, 279 millimeters thick, allows you to really dominate hillsides. That is something that other vehicles such as the KB5 just cannot do because it doesn't have the 10 degrees of gun depression. The vehicle is fit out with 1,500 hit points. Well, depending on who you're asking, I'd say the 1,500 hit points could be buffed a little bit. It's not extremely much, but on the other hand, it's also not like extremely little HP. The hull armor though is really non-existent. It's a basic American tank destroyer like the T-30 with no hull armor. It's like the T-29, 102 on the front, 76 on the side, 51 on the rear. Since this is basically the T-29 hull with just a bigger gun, but I think still the same turret as the T-29. Maybe a bit thicker on certain areas, especially on the front. But the main star of the show is obviously going to be the turret, with 279 millimeters of frontal armor thickness, 127 on the side, and 203 on the rear. Now that's quite interesting that the rear right here is like next to the front part of the turret, the thickest part, and that's something that I've noticed when I shoot a T-34 from the rear, from behind, that I usually do bounce off that turret. So you are much better off shooting the side or below the turret right here in the turret ring, or just shoot the hull. The hull doesn't really absorb a lot of damage. Now, mobility wise, this tank wasn't too bad. 35 kilometers per hour top speed, 810 engine horsepower. That's not on the same level as the KB5, but still, mobility is good enough to get you around in a heavy tank of this caliber. But yeah, to be fair, I think it could get a bit of a buff. This vehicle did get certain buffs with its firepower. I think the one buff was the gun handling. That was made a bit better. Gun handling, survivability was also adjusted a little bit, I think. But other than that, I don't think that the T-34 really has gotten massive upgrades. And it still is a very competitive tank, especially because of its gun. At tier 8 though, if you look at it now, it's not as unique as it once used to be. And that's basically the entire point of this review, that we are looking into the T-34 in the year 2020 compared to other premium tanks. Now, if you compare this vehicle, now I do have 432 meters spotting. That's basically because of the coated optics perk or equipment that I have right there. So yeah, should still spot a couple of things, at least at middle ranges. Middle to close ranges, I'll still be able to spot quite a lot of stuff. So if we compare this vehicle to the KB5 and the Lowe, I would say that armor-wise, this tank, except for the turret, is probably the weakest link. The Lowe certainly has the best overall armor, frontally speaking, because there are no major weak spots. The lower plate, even down here, has been buffed significantly. So if you shoot it from above at a certain angle, you can see that this part right here, where the upper plate or the upper glacis kind of combines with the lower glacis, it is 230 millimeters almost thick. The upper glacis 260 at certain angles, 220 to 30, and the turret right here is quite amazingly well armored. This used to be, or still is, kind of a weak spot down here. But to be able to really hit right below the gun mantlet is rather difficult. This right here, like where the gun mantlet kind of combines with the turret, that's a bit of a weak spot still. But the Lowe overall, I would say, has like the best overall armor at the front out of the three vehicles. The KB5 certainly would have taken the cake if we just compare it real fast. But since the KB5 has these massive weak spots with the R2-D2 turret right here, let's go back to armor viewer. This R2-D2 turret on the right side, then the very big cupola on top, then the armor on the turret being 190 millimeters thick. You can say that this vehicle certainly is going to take a lot of the heat if engaged frontally by anything that has enough pen to go through like 170 millimeters of armor. Now the T-34, on the other hand, if we compare it, I mean, obviously, its hull armor is nothing to write home about. Tier 6 vehicles can go through it, Tier 7s as well. It is nicely angled, though, so it has that going for itself, but the machine gun port always has been the infamous weak spot, with only being armored like 75 millimeters right there, obviously because of the machine gun. So that's a structural weak spot on this hull. But to be fair, you don't really need to aim that much if you're at Tier 8. All of the shots will go through. You do have a bit of a better chance of penning with the machine gun port and the lower plate, but other than that, yeah, it's not that impressive. 100 millimeters of armor is not very thick at tier 8, but the turret is a complete different story. Now, the turret is something that is very magnificent, and that's what the American tank destroyers and the American heavy tanks were used to be known for. Very, very sturdy turrets, very good guns, difficult to engage when they're hull down. That is something that a lot of other vehicles now at tier 8, even premium vehicles, have kind of gotten as well. If we take a look at the Renegade, at least the Renegade has a big machine gun port on top. But this one right here, it's a much better overall package than the T-34 if we compare it. And yeah, if you have the opportunity to either go for the T-34 or the M54 Renegade, I would much rather go for the Renegade because this tank has better armor overall. It has a better gun, much better gun handling, as you can see right here. Better rate of fire, 226 millimeters of pen with AP shells is just, yeah, it's, to be fair, much better than, well, it's not that much of a drawback from the 248, but the rate of fire really makes this tank. The mobility is better, you get 10 kilometers per hour more, and yeah, it kind of leaves the T-34 in a state where it kind of isn't the king of the hill anymore, but it still can do a lot of damage with its turret in the right situation. So we're going to be checking out gameplay. I would say that this tank for me personally is like a 7 out of 10. Now this is, all of these ratings are for me personally. These are my ratings, so all the experience, the games that I had in the tanks, that is something that probably will not fit to all the other guys. So if you really are looking for a premium tank out of the Holy Trinity, I think the T-34 would be something that I would rather buy the least out of the three if we compare it to the Lowe or the KV5. Because the KV5 just is that much more rare, the Lowe is just a better overall premium tank, and this is just a very specialized vehicle. But as always, we're going to check this out. Let's jump into a game, see how it handles, and in the end we're going to have like a little bit of a conclusion to this tank. So, I have two games prepared for you guys. One of them being on the map Glacier, which is somehow titled Sweden in the replay folder. And the other one is going to be on Pilsen, I think. Now, first we're going to watch the game where I'm playing against some tier 10 and tier 9 vehicles, and the other one will be against some tier 8 vehicles. Let me just make the game a bit more quiet. It's a bit loud. So, the T-34, one of the original premium tanks, or at least one of the very first tier 8 premium tanks. I think it was introduced with 2011 when they introduced the American heavy tanks. Yeah. So, what made this tank really the amazing kind of thing which I have in my mind? Well, the T-34 had this big 120mm gun, which was quite interesting because no other tier 8 premium vehicle had the under 20mm gun at first. Well, the IS-6 eventually did get a 122mm gun when it came into the game, but the T-34 just had the 120mm gun with a lot of pen. The IS-6 was running the same gun that the KV-1S was running, which didn't really have a lot of pen, but as a tier 8 with very interesting armor layout, which the IS-6 had with the spaced armor, it became a very interesting vehicle, a tank that was quite powerful at that time. So the T-34 never really had strong hull armor. That's why it was such a bad tier 9 vehicle. The gun handling as a heavy tank at tier 9 was rather good though, once you unlocked the 120mm gun. The turret traverse speed was very bad, just as it is right now. But the gun handling was a lot better. You also had a better rate of fire than you have right now. So yeah, basically the T-34 is a very niche kind of tank. It's very good in a hull down position as long as there is no artillery in the game. As soon as there is artillery, you're going to have a bit of a problem. Because your turret, although being quite heavily armored, right here we're going to take a shot at the FV. That's something that's going to happen a lot of times when you're playing the T-34, that you're getting no damage, blocked shots by spaced armor. And right there, that was really, really ugly. Because the FV put one into us, and we just lost about, you know, another 200 HP to the additional 378 HP we lost to the Renegade. So it's quite interesting to see that the Renegade almost did 400 HP, although it only has a 105mm gun. So in retrospect, if we take a look at the T-34 now, it's in a very awkward position. It's one of those premium tanks that just has completely been skipped past by other premium tanks. It has completely lost its place, to be fair, because other premium tanks like the T-26E5, I think, like the Renegade, have just completely taken its place. They almost do the same amount of damage that the T-34 does. Sometimes you roll high, but you know, having a 12.9 second reload time with a gun that just doesn't aim as fast, that isn't as accurate as other guns, and that, you know, sometimes bounces with 248mm of pen. That is not a lot of satisfying games that you're going to have. I've played a lot of games now to get this review in, and I've noticed that there's a lot of nostalgia coming with playing this tank, because I did not have it in my memory as such a weak kind of vehicle. Because as you can see, we're barely getting the 400 damage done. We roll for 376, we roll for 394, 389, and we only rolled once for over 400 damage, twice now, 405 and 409. But we have basically just lost the majority of our HP already. Against the tier 10, obviously you cannot really expect a lot. But to be fair, with the pen that you're boasting, 248, you can still penetrate the sides of a mouse. So that's something that you cannot do with the IS-6. But at the same time, you can see that the fighting spirit this vehicle has is, it's very limited. In close quarter combat, the T-34's aim time, accuracy are actually good enough to allow you to be at least decently, I'd say, competitive. But the rate of fire, the DPM, just give you a very big downgrade. That, coupled with the lack of armor, with the lack of HP that you have in this tank, makes it a very awkward kind of affair to play this tank. In this position, if we would have played the Renegade or something else, the T-26E5, we would have probably done a lot more damage because of the rate of fire. Because armor would not have been as important. Our turret armor, it's all nice and good that we have so much turret armor, but this turret armor doesn't help us in this scenario at all. So you're kind of left with a tank that is not fast enough to get somewhere, you know, to be like competitive. You are in a tank that just isn't able to produce the rate of fire that other tier 8s are able to do now. And that makes it a rather frustrating experience, especially when I've played the tank recently now. So I'd say we jump over to tier 8, we take a look how the vehicle does perform at the same tier level, and then we're going to have a conclusion about what I think about this tank, especially now in 2020 in comparison to the other KV5 and to the Lowe, and hope I can give you guys a little bit of an insight what to do if you're interested in getting a T-34 maybe, or you're, you know, thinking about getting a T-34 or a Lowe. So as already mentioned previously, we're playing on the map Pilsen, and you can see this is a complete tier 8 matchup. We're only playing against tier 8 vehicles, no tier 9s, no tier 7s, no tier 6 tanks. So yeah, what can we do in this map? We're a heavy tank, we're probably going over to the rubble first and foremost. That's where we can utilize maybe some of our turret armor. Take, you know, the strong suits of the vehicle and use it to our advantage. But it's always kind of a bit difficult on flat maps such as this. But there's still rubble that you can hide behind and use as cover to hide your lower plate or your hull. So yeah, you can see that the mobility of the T-34 right here with 35 kilometers per hour, it's just, I'd say it's okay, but it certainly isn't fast enough to be one of the first tanks in position. You can see that the Chrysler GF, the IS-6 and the 703 all are much faster than this vehicle. And I think that's just generally speaking something that that has happened to the T-34. The T-34 has lost its T-34 has kind of lost its place in being a mediocre fast vehicle. I remember that it wasn't as slow back in my mind, but like definitely in 2020 the T-34 is a bit of a awkward vehicle. That's something that I have noticed, especially when going up against other vehicles. I think the pen, the novelty of having 248 millimeters of pen, is just something that isn't really as appealing anymore as it used to be when this tank first was released as a premium tank. Now, I cannot really complain. I got this tank for free. I didn't really have to buy it, but the pen and the bad con handling is just something that doesn't really work well if you have experienced other vehicles. And I've tried a lot of things. My crew is very good. My equipment is decent enough. It should give me quite decent values, but the accuracy on this vehicle and just the aim time, the rate of fire, the mobility, the armor, all of these facts are just a bit underwhelming, I would say, in 2020. Maybe we've just gotten used to premium tanks that are way too powerful. Maybe the Renegade, you know, Defender, the Skorpion G, they're really good at what they're supposed to be doing. The Defender is just a very good all-round tier 9 heavy tank. It's basically a tier 9. I mean, from the armor layout, it's like a tier 9. It just doesn't have the HP of a tier 9, but still at the same time, it's a very strong tank. So then you have this T-34, which is kind of awkward. It has gotten a buff, I think, 2 years ago, but it's just not on the level as the Lowe. But at the same time, I have to say the Lowe for me is kind of a tank that is able to perform way better than it did before, because they actually made the armor a lot thicker, how they maybe first envisioned it to be. And the T-34 just doesn't have that hull armor, because that's like the stats that they gave it at the very start, and that's how it was supposed to be played, you know, with the amount of hull armor, 102 millimeters. The thing is, the turret is very large. Your turret traverse time is also very, very slow. And having a large turret also means you have a lot of ground where enemies can actually shoot you at, like a lot of surface, attack surface that the enemy can take care of. And right here, this is a 400 damage gun, 366, right? And you have a 12.9 second reload time. It's just so dissatisfying to be sitting here and shooting a ELC even 90 for 366 when other tanks at this tier premiums are maybe able to put another round into the ELC and do maybe 600 damage, like 300 and something. But once you do the 444 damage, that is rather nice. But it just happens so seldomly. Like with RNG, it's very awkward. It's a very awkward thing. This tank is very awkward if you're trying to do good. I've struggled to actually do consistent 2000 damage with this tank, which was something that somehow I always was able to do with this vehicle. But if you're trying to play this tank as more of a heavy vehicle, you're going to be struggling quite a bit. So we at least managed to do 1,523 damage, but still we did lose quite a bit of HP. And you know, 12.9 seconds reload time, the mobility, the armor, like the entire package is just something that screams outdated. And that is something that I absolutely hate when playing the T-34. You have such a long reload time, right? And you still get your shells clogged up in an RHM Waffenträger Borsig. That is so annoying. I tracked them, I did get the assistance damage, which probably is better than, you know, doing the damage, since we got like 803 HP out of that single RHM right there. But still, it's very annoying that your shots just do not do a lot of damage. I have the feeling that with the T-34, it's much more annoying than with other tanks, because as a tier 8 heavy, your reload time is the basically the reload time of a tier 8 tank destroyer, which can like pen much better, which like does a lot more damage, 500 something with the Skorpion G, 490, and that is just something that is really, really awkward when you're playing the T-34. So the T-34 is basically a vehicle that I would not say doesn't have a place in World of Tanks anymore, but if you compare it with the KV-5 and the Lowe, it seems to be more of a specialized vehicle, very good in certain scenarios where you can stay hull down, where the enemy is not going to be pushing you and you can dictate the pace of the combat. But other than that, the T-34 is going to struggle. Its gun, its armament is not doing very well. Its main attributes, like the main pros of the tank, good pen, high alpha damage, good sturdy turret, have all been surpassed by other premium tanks. And that leaves you with a kind of a frustrating experience when you're playing a T-34 in 2020. So I think certainly this tank, out of all the premiums, needs a buff, in my opinion. If you compare it to the Lowe was buffed. The Lowe is much better. The T-34 should get something along the lines of maybe more alpha damage, maybe increase the rate of fire by a little bit, give it better gun handling, and then this tank really could take off again, be a very good, decent vehicle. But at this point in time, I think like I gave it a 7 in my ratings. I'd say I'd stoop lower to maybe a 6, because I still enjoy the vehicle out of the nostalgia I have. But if you compare it to the Lowe or the KV-5, I think most of the people are much better off with getting the Lowe or the KV-5, because the KV-5 is a rare tank. The KV-5 is very interesting to play. It's super fun to play. And the T-34 just is a lot more frustrating. At least when you bounce on the KV-5, with the lack of pen that you have, you still have a very high rate of fire of 7 seconds, like 8 rounds per minute. And the T-34 just doesn't have that. The turret is a nice feature, obviously, when you're hull down, but artillery doesn't care. And when they are flanking you, your turret traverse is so bad. Your turret is a huge target. Everyone's just going to pen it from the sides. Your hull is terrible. Your hull traverse is not good enough. Your mobility is not good enough. Your gun sometimes lets you down. The alpha is just not good enough. So I still managed to get a 3 mark, but as you can see, now we're somewhere in the low 90s, I think 92 at the moment, since I've played a couple of games. But yeah, I would definitely not recommend buying the T-34 if you have the option of buying other vehicles, such as the Lowe, such as the KV-5, such as the Chrysler K, the T-26E5, the Renegade, all better options than the T-34. And I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out.